Hey guys, today I'm going to be going over 5 of the best budget paddles available out there right now that are $100 or less. These days paddles are getting more and more expensive, but there are still some very good inexpensive options out there that still compete with some of the best paddles on the market. So whether you're on a budget trying to find a solid paddle for cheap, or you're finally trying to upgrade from the random 4 paddle set you found on Amazon, this video is here to help. Anyways, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy, and now let's jump into things. Alright, let's start off with the Neonic Force. This is honestly one of Neonic's best paddles they've made because of how good it is and how cheap they were able to list it. This is an elongated 16mm carbon fiber paddle that comes in at only $89.99 with my discount code. Here are also the other stats if you're interested. Now, the thing that I really like about the Neonic Force is that it's just a solid and comfortable paddle to play with. And as far as cheaper paddles go, that's pretty much a win in itself. Now, I wouldn't say it's special in one particular area. I think it overall has a fairly average stat line between power, pop, and control, but it is consistent and it feels like the quality is good enough that it competes with other more expensive paddles out there. The other thing that I love the most about this paddle too, and the thing that I think makes this specific paddle unique, is just how maneuverable it is. Mine weighed at only 7.9 ounces with a swing weight of 117, which isn't substantially light, but it was still so easy just to whip around, whether it be for drives, flicks, or overheads. It honestly felt like I was noticeably quicker at the net with this. That said, I believe the average weight is typically a bit heavier, but still, it's a really fun and consistent paddle to use. It's also pretty rare to have an elongated paddle shape that feels as maneuverable as well, which is a pretty fun combination to have. It's also worth mentioning that the soft game felt pretty great too, as it is a 16mm paddle after all. But yeah, if you're looking for a cheaper, whippier, maneuverable all-court paddle that is solid across the board, the Neonic Force is a fantastic choice. And it's also just a paddle that can last you a while no matter how good you get. I actually know a fair amount of people who have been playing a long time who still use this as their main paddle. So yeah, it's a great option. All right, next up, I want to of course talk about the Vatic Prism Flash. Now, if you've heard about any paddle on this list, it's probably this one, as it's easily one of the most popular paddles out there now. But honestly, it's for a good reason, because it was and still is one of the best budget paddles on the market. The Prism Flash with my discount code is only $89.99, and you can actually even choose between whether you want a 14mm or a 16mm size, as well as choose between a 5.3 inch handle and a 5.75 inch handle, which is actually really nice because a lot of budget paddles don't really give you those kind of options as far as customization goes. I've tried all of them at one point, but that said, this paddle specifically is the 16mm with the longer handle. Anyways, the Prism Flash is really interesting because it's not actually thermoformed. It's more of a Gen 1 paddle, but even so, it's a very good paddle. And the thing that makes it so good is it's just really well built. It doesn't really feel like a cheap paddle at all. In fact, it actually feels better than some of the $200 paddles I've used in the past, and it's just very well built and a high quality paddle. Now, as far as the gameplay itself goes, the main standout point with the Prism Flash is that it just has such a soft feel to it, which makes the entire control game, like resetting and dropping the ball, incredibly easy. The amount of forgiveness that you get with this is truly one of the best on the market. So that in itself also just makes it such a great paddle for players trying to work on their control game. It just really has a plush feel to it, and the dwell time you get with it really helps you grab the ball and place it wherever you want. Now, the only unfortunate downside of this paddle is that this thing doesn't generate a lot of power, and it's honestly one of the main reasons that I see people switch away from this paddle. Now, that's not to say this paddle is incapable of generating power, though. I mean, if you swing hard enough, you'll still be able to generate plenty of power to finish off points and be aggressive when you want. The main difference is it will just take a lot more effort to do so than your typical paddle. Besides that, it is still a fantastic option for anyone looking for a nicer paddle. It's honestly one of my go-to recommendations, especially for people looking to upgrade from their cheap Amazon paddle, because the super nice thing about the Prism Flash is no matter how much better you get at pickleball, you can continue to use this for as long as you play. It is one of the few paddles on this list that you could really use all the way up to the professional level if you really wanted to. Again, the only downside is that if you're looking for a more powerful paddle or powerful option, then I probably wouldn't go for this. But if you're just looking for a really nice paddle for under $100, then this is a fantastic option. Now up next, we have the Hyperbeat One. This, unlike the Vatic, is not a popular paddle. In fact, it's actually a newer paddle from a new company called Beatnik. But what's funny about this paddle is it's actually very similar to the Vatic Prism Flash, but with one small difference in that this is pretty much the poppier, more powerful version of the Vatic Prism Flash. And it's for this reason that I really wanted to include this on this budget paddle list. The Hyperbeat One is a raw carbon fiber faced 60mm paddle that is only $99 with my discount code, and the big difference between this and the Vatic Prism Flash is that this is thermoformed. Furthermore, this might be one of the best bang for your buck paddles available. The gameplay with this is literally best described as a poppier, more powerful version of the Vatic Prism Flash. The crazy thing is that it still holds onto all of the control in the soft feeling that the Prism Flash has. It actually plays really similar to the Vatic Flash Carbon Fiber, or their Pro version of the Flash, but it's cheaper and arguably feels a bit better too. Now it's worth noting the handle itself does feel a little weird. I think the grip is just textured a bit bumpier than usual, but you can always just put an overgrip on if you want. But at the end of the day, this is a great non-expensive option, especially for people who have enjoyed the Vatic but want something with a bit more power and pop to it, which is a lot of people who use the Vatic. I mean, it really just comes down to, are you willing to pay an extra $10 over the Vatic for a bit more power and pop if that's what you're looking for? That said, I want to clarify that this isn't a power paddle. In fact, it's pretty far from it. It's just all relative to the Vatic, and if you really want a power paddle, you're unlikely to find one for under $100. However, it's still just another great paddle that you can play with at any level in pickleball, and also one that I think can actually compete with the top brands and paddles out there too, like 6Zero's Double Black Diamond, for instance. So yeah, shout out to Beatnik for making a great budget paddle. All right, moving on to A11's Zenith Pro. This is an elongated 16mm carbon fiber thermoformed paddle that typically costs only $76.50 with my discount code. A11N is a somewhat known brand, but not so much for pickleball paddles. That said, I have to admit, I was pretty impressed with the A11N Zenith Pro. The sweet spot on it is actually really big for an elongated paddle, and it instantly felt really nice to use. It was also surprisingly sturdy and also felt really well built too. Playing with this, I felt like it could drive fairly hard, play the soft game really easily, and across the board, this thing performed really strong and was very consistent. Now, it's a bit on the bulkier and heavier side, so if you like whippier paddles, this probably isn't for you. Additionally, the only downside with this paddle is that I kind of wish it was a bit stronger and poppier. If I was directly comparing this to the Neonic Force, I would say that this is the less poppy but more heavier control version of it. I mean, it all really comes down to preference though, as both are solid options. However, literally right now, as of October 9th, if you go on their site, I believe you can get an even bigger October discount. There's currently just a huge October sale going on just because of Prime Day, I believe. It also currently lets you pair that with my discount code, so it could be a play. That said, I only think this will last a day, and there's a good chance that most of you watching won't catch this in time, but even so, this is still a great paddle for $76.50, which is what it is normally at. Also, the case for this thing is like the softest case I've ever felt too, so there's that too, you know, it's all about the important stuff. I also want to give an honorable mention to a different A11N paddle as well, the Zenith Carry. This is actually pretty similar to the Neonic Force paddle, coming in at only $57.79 with my discount code. It's an elongated paddle, a bit lighter weight than the Force, but it's also really whippy too. The only difference is that this does feel a bit cheaper than the Force and the other paddles on this list, but for under 60 bucks, it actually plays really well. The only one thing about this paddle though is that the grit on this is kind of illegal. And because of that, the spin on this is also understandably insane. I mean, I've never seen a paddle stick this hard because of the grit. And this is even after using this paddle for a while. I mean, look at this. This is kind of crazy. Regardless, you can hit fairly hard with this, and the pop was actually fairly solid too. The only area I could definitely feel the cheaper side coming in is in the consistency for the control game. And it's really for that reason that I wouldn't encourage people to use this at a higher competitive level. But if you're just planning on playing rec at your local courts, then this is a great paddle, and it is still 10 times better than those Amazon packages. Also, I think right now on Amazon Prime, they're going for $42. Again, I think this will only last the day, but if you can snag it, nice. All right, last up, we have 6Zero's first budget paddle that they released not too long ago called the Quartz, and you can snag this paddle for only $81 using my discount code. This is a 15mm raw carbon fiber paddle, which is actually really nice because if you really are getting into a nicer paddle for the first time, it's a great middle ground to help you determine whether you like a thicker paddle that gives you more control or a thinner 14mm paddle that gives you more pop. Now, as far as the gameplay with this paddle goes, it's pretty solid. The thing that's nice about the Quartz is that it's fairly solid in every area, but the downside is that it's not so strong in one particular spot. But if you're looking for a more of an all-court type starter paddle, it's a good option, especially for the price point. That said, I was actually shocked at how much power this thing could actually generate, and I think a lot of that was due to how whippy of a paddle it was. Still, this is arguably the hardest hitting paddle out of all of the paddles on this list. The only downside, again, being that the sweet spot is a bit smaller, so there's a lot more dead spots. Now, is this going to compare to some of 6Zero's other big name paddles like the Ruby or a Double Black Diamond? Not really. I mean, I think the Ruby and Double Black Diamond are to be expected, just better in every way than the Quartz, but they're also more than double the price. It was just very average across the board, which honestly is kind of a good thing for a budget paddle. Plus, one advantage that this does have over the Prism Flash or Hyperbeat, or even the Double Black Diamond or Ruby, is that this feels a lot more maneuverable, which is actually really nice in fast hands battles. It's actually one of the main reasons that I sometimes prefer using this over some of the other budget paddles. Regardless, it really just comes down to preference and your playstyle. Now, if you like something a bit more whippy and also maneuverable at the net, then I would consider the Quartz, especially if you like a hybrid shape too. But if not, I would consider paying the extra few bucks to get one of the other paddles on this list. Overall, these are all really solid budget paddles, and if you want some kind of visual on how I think they all compare stat-wise, here's a chart showing my personal opinion on how I think they're different, but of course, it isn't going to be entirely accurate. Anyways, all that said, at the end of the day, money does ultimately play a role in the quality of a paddle, but not as much as I think some people think, because with the exception of the A11 carry, every one of these paddles on this list could be used at a high level. Some probably a little bit better than others, but still, they could all be used at a high level. That said, if you were trying to find specific paddles like power paddles, for example, you are going to have to pay a bit more for that, but still, it doesn't change the fact that you can still find high quality paddles at a low price. There's also obviously a lot more budget paddles out there, but these are just a few of the budget paddles that I would personally recommend. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful. Please consider subscribing if it was. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.